Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate it. We will be taking you, Rick Lowe is the Senior Market Research Manager at Miden Marketing. He's been there for 3 years and has over 20 years of market research and consumer insights experience. So I'm a Senior Account Executive at Miden Marketing, and my background is in the retail sales and marketing side of the meat sector. We're here to take you through a journey of the current U.S. consumer, meat purchasing trends, and consumers' evolving expectations. Starting off with the current state of affairs, the U.S. meat industry, like many others, has gone through unprecedented changes in the last few months. And when we arrive back at a new normal, we shouldn't expect it to look the same as the industry we knew at the beginning of the year. Pardon this very busy slide, but I think it depicts the many concerns and challenges Americans are facing today. We have COVID-19, the election, social justice movements, the economic downturn, natural disasters. It's fair to say U.S. consumers have a lot on their minds. As I watched the news this morning, here are a few of the big stories. Over 10 million COVID cases in the U.S. Every state saw an increase in cases. Airlines are anticipating Thanksgiving to be the biggest travel time since March. Retailers are starting to limit purchase quantities. But the good news is Pfizer is confident their vaccine trials are 90% effective. It could be available by December. Right now, consumers are being asked to balance concern for public health crisis and concerns for the economy. Economic downturns historically cause consumers to be very price sensitive, but the health crisis leads consumers to be more conscious of quality and show signs that they are willing to pay more for health claims and attributes. Our latest COVID-19 survey shows that American consumers are very concerned for their own health and economic situation, but even more concerned with the health of others and overall economy. I'll pass this over to Rick to dig deeper into the U.S. consumer.
Thanks, Melissa. So let's talk about the U.S. consumer. I spent a lot of time at Miden observing and connecting with consumers in an attempt to better understand what their needs are, then work with meat industry professionals such as yourself to put together products and programs that will meet those needs. It's very important to understand that we are dealing with a very diverse consumer base in the U.S., and it continues to get more complex with each new generation. Hopefully, this information on how diverse the consumer population is and what in general we are hearing that they want and need will help you have a better understanding about what you need to do in order to help keep meat a relevant option for them. So before I get too in-depth on who the consumer is, let's take a quick look at how big the U.S. marketplace is. In 2019, there were approximately 660,000 restaurants in the United States, generating about $863 billion in sales. Obviously, those numbers are going to change because of COVID, but that provides a general feel of how big the food industry is. And in terms of the retail segment, there is approximately 40,000 grocery stores in the U.S., including warehouse clubs, which generate almost $700 billion in sales. And in terms of meat, grocery store meat department sales were at about $50 billion at the end of 2019. And that includes almost $720 million in grass-fed beef and slightly over $400 million in lamb sales. So now let's talk about the U.S. consumer. Miden Marketing conducted a segmentation study at the beginning of 2019. And what you are seeing here are the 5 segments of meat eaters that we identified from our research. If you're not familiar with segmentation research, it's a type of study where the goal is to understand differences among consumers by grouping them with other consumers who share similar traits, beliefs, and attitudes. So this slide provides an overview of the 5 segments of the U.S. meat eaters that we identified. So starting from the left, we have protein progressives. These consumers are the most open to all types of proteins. They tend to experiment eating different foods and generally will try different trends, including plant-based meats. Next, we have family first food lovers. These meat eaters are all about making memories around food. They tend to love to cook. Package claims resonate with this group, and this group prefers a nothing added approach where grass-fed meat is preferable to grain-fed options. Next, we have aging traditionalists. And aging traditionalists enjoy conventional meat and chicken, and they expect it to be the center of their plate option. They have little interest in buying meat with claims or purchasing any meat alternatives. Convenience chasers, these consumers, not surprisingly, are in search of a quick, convenient option to consume either on the go or to be able to quickly cook. Convenience chasers are highly price conscious about the proteins they purchase, and they have little interest in package claims. And finally, we identified wellness divas. In wellness divas, this segment consists of consumers who are really hyper-focused on health and wellness claims. They're actively trying to eliminate meat from their diet. However, when they do eat meat, it must have a claim on it, for example, such as no added hormones, no GMOs, anything along that line. As I mentioned, we conducted our segmentation study in 2019. However, because of COVID, we wanted to see if the size of our segments had changed. So we conducted a short survey in September where we asked consumers key questions that we used in our original survey to create our segments. Convenience chasers were the largest segment before COVID, and it has grown even more. It was 30% of meat eaters before COVID, and now it's up to 39% of meat eaters, while protein progressives have also shown growth from 16% of the population to 20%. If you think about it, these increases should make some sense. Convenience chasers represent consumers who are price conscious and interested in convenient meal solutions. And as we continue further along with COVID, more consumers are worried about their economic situation, and many kids are still at home from school, so parents are looking for convenient meal solutions. And protein progressives enjoy experimenting with foods, and one of the things we hear very often now is that consumers are really interested in trying to cook new things, as they are extremely bored with many of the same options they have been cooking for the last 8 months. So now let's meet a pretty typical US consumer and see how her meat buying habits have changed since the pandemic began.
My name is Leslie, and I live with my husband and 12-year-old daughter in the Chicago suburbs. I probably eat meat once or twice a week, definitely more than we used to since COVID. We're home a lot more, not eating out nearly as much as we used to. We're also trying a lot of new recipes, really because there's way more time on our hands than we ever had before, and also just to keep things interesting since we're home so much. I think it would be really helpful online if you could actually see the differences for all the different cuts and choices of meat listed, so you knew how they differed from each other. It would also be helpful if they said what those meats were good for, especially when something's not available, to help you figure out what a good replacement would be. Typically, if I can't find it, I have to go online to see what else would work and just kind of hope for the best.
So let's look at the US population as a whole in the generational segments. The US population is currently more than 330 million people, and it's made up of 6 generations that you see here. Each generation is driven to purchase by a different set of reasons. What is most important to consider as we look at the generations is their size and ultimately their buying power. And we also can't forget who is going to have the dollars to spend as you plan for marketing your products in the future. So currently, boomers have the highest dollar share of meat and poultry being bought, but the least potential for growth as this cohort continues to age. Most of the dollar growth potential right now is coming from millennials and Gen Xers. So as we look to the immediate future, it's important to keep in mind the priorities of this younger audience. It's also important to think about the fact that consumers from different race and ethnic groups shop differently, starting with millennials, but accelerating with Gen Z. Younger generations are more racially and ethnically diverse than any generation before them. And Gen Z is on track to be the most educated generation yet. We know that with education comes curiosity, and with curiosity comes an elevated importance for being transparent about our claims and processes. So now let me introduce you to a millennial. Meet Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina with my wife and 2 daughters. We tend to do things the old-fashioned way and go to the grocery store. But because of convenience, we have recently started doing online orders. In our house, we eat all types of meat. So chicken, steak, pork, whatever you got, we're eating. Our biggest challenge, especially since COVID, has definitely been finding the quality of meat that we're used to. We've seen a lot of, lower tier meat available, but we tend to like a more either locally sourced, natural meat, organic if possible. But mainly it's just finding affordable quality meat. We're always looking for more information on just different types of meat. So whether that be learning a veal recipe or learning some new cut of meat, as long as it's a new, fun, and refreshing recipe that the whole family can enjoy, we're always looking for that.
So, as I mentioned, as the U.S. consumer changes in terms of younger generations having more purchasing power, are more ethnically diverse, and are more educated, we see that different groups are interested in different types of meats. What you are looking at here is a summary chart that shows that millennials and meat eaters with different ethnic backgrounds tend to index higher on a couple of key package claims like grass-fed beef, but also with lamb. So we just met a couple of consumers, and with every generation having different priorities, it can be tough to find the shared attitudes that appeal to more than one demographic. Here we see the differences in 2 key generational groups: millennials, who are 24 to 39 years old now and are coming into their prime meat buying years, and Gen Zers, who are between the ages of 8 and 23. But these attitudes really focus on, obviously, the older Gen Zers. On the left side are millennials. They are higher protein consumers. They're dealing with a lot of debt right now. They have an increasing interest in plant-based proteins. They are driven by their desire to experiment with new foods. On the right side, we see Gen Z, who are much more adventurous eaters now. They're more social. They love meal kits, and based on the attitudes and behaviors, are likely to replace meat with plant proteins in the future. However, where I want to really focus is the middle. The shared attitudes that millennials and Gen Zs have. They are more concerned about animal care practices, nutrition, and the environmental impact of meat than older generations. However, they are open to new information, which creates an opportunity to help them feel like they're making an ethical, safe, and responsible decision when purchasing animal proteins. Finally, this cohort of consumers are really being disproportionately impacted by the economic hardship right now in the U.S. In late March, a survey found that 52% of Americans under the age of 45 had either lost their job, been put on leave, or had their hours dramatically cut, compared to only 26% of people over the age of 45. This is in line with why we have seen the percentage of convenience chasers increase in our updated segmentation results. So it used to be pretty simple back in the day to be responsive to the needs of your primary shopper. For the boomer generation, it was all about price and taste. As they've aged, convenience has become an important factor also. However, millennials are also interested in knowing things like, is the meat minimally processed? Is it ethically sourced? Were the workers treated fairly? Were the animals treated humanely? So there's a lot more things that millennials are interested in and that everyone has to be cognizant of as you're selling meat to them. Millennial moms, for example, represent over $200 billion in spending power, and 86% said that they would pay more for a product with full transparency. These days, consumers want to know more than what's in your product. So obviously, we can't share a presentation these days on a consumer, without providing you with some insights into what we're seeing and what you are experiencing in the marketplace. So the fear of limited supply has caused meat sales to soar since the pandemic. Retailer sales showed unprecedented growth in both dollar and volume of meat and poultry sales during the last 8 months. This chart to the right shows weekly dollar growth versus a year ago. And you can see general meat sales at the beginning of March, where it starts in a corner, were generally flat. And then obviously they jumped 80% year over year in mid-March once the pandemic hit. And now you also see how chicken performed, turkey performed, and pork performed. And here's lamb. You can see that lamb has actually outperformed the other proteins, but it's the smallest base, so it's the easiest to see growth. Obviously, the larger the base, the less growth you're going to see. So that's why we see this. And especially if you notice that the purple lines go spike high and then come down low, that's right around Easter. That's a question we get all the time. And then the red line that just popped up, that is beef. So as you can, and also then as you can see from the pie chart on the left, this was actually asked at the end of September. We see that 1/3 of meat eaters are still indicating that they're stockpiling meat and chicken. So it isn't a phenomenon that has already happened in March and April. It's still actually going on now. Not only has the amount of meat being sold increased, but consumers are cooking that meat very differently. Since the beginning of COVID, Mida Marketing has been tracking meat and poultry shopping and cooking habits. Some changes we have seen so far are pretty clear. Stockpiling and freezing meat are things that consumers are doing more often. They are also experimenting with new ways to cook meat. They are purchasing a wider variety of meats, and they're cooking larger servings so they can be used for multiple meals.
All right, now I'm going to take you into consumer expectations. First, we'll take a look at convenience. I'm going to introduce you to a consumer who prioritizes convenience. Meet Carrie. She's a mom. She has 3 kids. She's a professional working from home. She prefers to buy natural products and buying all her groceries online for pickup.
Hi there, my name is Carrie. I live in the suburbs of Charlotte, so outside the city, about 15 to 20 miles. Live here with my husband and my 3 children. They're ages 10, 8, and 5. We have a very busy and complex household dynamic. I work from home full time, so I am often very, very strapped for time. So what that really means when it comes to dinner time specifically and meal time is that we often kind of do a balance of what I would say to go kind of take out meals as well as sort of trying to meal prep and get dinner on the table in a timely fashion. My shopping patterns in terms of buying groceries were a little bit, actually a lot different than what they are today. So for most of my packaged food items, I would purchase those at Target while I was purchasing other products for the household, like household goods, toilet paper, etc. So anything like boxed cereal, fruit snacks, juice boxes, etc. would all get purchased at Target. And part of that as well was because the prices were a lot lower than the local grocery store. When it came to fresh produce and sometimes fresh meat, if you will, we would purchase a lot of those extra items at the local grocery store. So our closest, most convenient grocery store, again, because we are so time pressed, is Harris Teeter. So purchase a lot of that there. When it came to purchasing what I would consider more quality meats or bulk meats, we would purchase those at Costco because our household size is a little bit larger. So when it comes to meat buying and meat selection, we tend to fall into our old habits and buy the same cuts over and over. Since COVID, we have had quite a dramatic shift in our shopping pattern and our shopping behavior. We are trying to do the best that we can do in terms of not going into a physical store. So I have actually, again, ordered a lot via Target, but through their Shipped app. So a lot of that is just coming directly to the doorstep, which has been absolutely amazing. I'm not really sure why I didn't do it sooner, because it has really given me a lot of time back, and that time right now is always precious.
So we now know consumers are seeking convenience, but what are retailers doing to embrace this change? The answer is a lot of different things. Stores such as Wegmans and Giant are helping shoppers with meal solutions by offering prepared foods that are ready to eat or ready to heat, value-added meat products that are ready to cook. Along these same lines, Home Chef, owned by Kroger, is now offering their meal kits in select Kroger stores and recently rolled out a new Heat and Eat product line offering pizzas and soups. Albertsons, who acquired Plated 3 years ago and ended their subscription service recently, relaunched the brand in store and added convenience of pre-cut ingredients. So as the holidays grow closer, retailers expect consumers to do more holiday cooking at home this season than last year, but also expect these meals to be smaller. Another big trend that we're seeing is the integration of restaurants and bars into grocery stores. Might as well grab a drink and a meal before you're grocery shopping, right? A few to mention include H-E-B's first ever food hall. It's in one of the Austin stores, and it boasts 6 restaurants ranging from Texas barbecue to Mexican food to Japanese grill. Hy-Vee in the Midwest has seen success with their Market Grill restaurants for years, but recently announced the conversion of all their full-service restaurants into the Wahlburgers franchises. And this trend is expected to continue as more grocers see success in this space. As we all know, COVID has taken a hit on the food service industry. Restaurants are shutting down, menus are limited, dining capacity is reduced or non-existent. According to the National Restaurant Association, 100,000 restaurants have closed permanently or long-term. In August, sales were down 34%. Those who are working through the challenges have had to pivot and done so quickly. Curbside to go and delivery is becoming the new norm, from fine dining all the way to convenience stores. Who would have thought you'd be able to order food for delivery from your local corner store? 7-Eleven, Wawa, and Quick Trips are not only thriving selling gas, but also in the food space. Thinking back to Rick's slide showing this sheer size of the U.S. marketplace, there are over 600,000 restaurants in the U.S., 40,000 grocery stores, and 155,000 convenience stores. That's a lot of opportunity to move some meat. The key to keeping customers happy as we navigate through increased food service pickup and delivery is keeping the process easy and accessible and ensuring accuracy and product quality. The last thing you want when you receive your delivery order after waiting 30 to 45 minutes is the wrong order, missing items, or just poor quality food. So now looking at direct to consumer, obviously the pandemic has accelerated e-commerce growth as a whole in the US, but this year, let's talk about D2C specific to the meat space. Rick will get into the numbers on the next few slides, but overall, consumers have been ordering more meat online, whether it be via their local grocery store or other online platforms like CrowdCow or ButcherBox. We're seeing a lot of innovation and success from our friends at Thomas Farms, who recently launched their own D2C site, delivering high quality meat directly to your door, as well as restaurants dipping their toes into this space, like Dickey's Barbecue, offering their favorites via subscription box, bundle boxes, or individual orders. Delivering meat to people's homes is not a new idea. Omaha Steaks started a mail order business in 1953. Though the process and the technology has changed, they are still around today, running an online store that emphasizes quality, price, and free shipping. In this busy space, it is important to understand who your customers are, market to them appropriately, and exceed their expectations. You may get their order once, but if the product or experience doesn't meet their expectations, you are not likely to get it back again.
So here we can see how online grocery shopping has drastically changed in the past year. COVID-19 unquestionably advanced the adoption of e-commerce by several years, especially related to groceries. As you can see, meat dollar sales growth outpaced total sale growth both in e-commerce and in-store purchases. As total store e-commerce sales have grown by 50%, you can see that on the bottom left, refrigerated meat sales have almost doubled that to 94% growth versus the same time period a year ago. And when comparing all meat across the store, e-commerce sales, the yellow bars, have a much higher growth rate than in-store sales, which are the blue bars. So as I mentioned before, Miden Marketing has been tracking meat and poultry shopping habits since the beginning of the pandemic. We have seen the number of consumers purchasing meat and poultry online just skyrocket. The pandemic has accelerated the online shopping trend, as more than half of consumers now have purchased meat online since the pandemic started, and that has held steady since April. We see that grocery click and collect is the most popular method, with about 1/3 of consumers using it, while grocery delivery and general online delivery services are being used by about 1/4 of consumers. Not only are consumers using online methods to purchase meat, but they're going to stick with it once the pandemic ends. We asked consumers what would be their primary way to purchase fresh meat and poultry once the pandemic ends, either online or offline. We see that 34% of meat consumers will use an online method as their primary way of purchasing meat, even once the pandemic ends. And this number continues to grow every month. It's not only the numbers that are important, but the fact is that consumers have grown accustomed to this method and find it actually easier and more convenient, is an easier and more convenient way to purchase meat. And what is really interesting is that before the pandemic, we had constantly heard from consumers that they would never want to purchase fresh meat online because they didn't want someone else to pick out their meat. However, as consumers have been using these sources, they've realized that the quality of meat they are eating hasn't decreased because someone else is picking it out. And one of my favorite quotes here is on the bottom right. You would think these grocery stores would pick the worst they had in order to move that product faster. I have found the opposite to be true. They do actually pick the best. This has been a significant shift, which requires everyone in the meat industry to shift with them. So even though people are extremely interested in convenience when making purchase decisions, they are also interested in a growing desire to eat healthier. The next topic we will briefly discuss revolves around this growing desire for health and wellness. So the first thing I want to do is level set. Here's the evolution of health in the food industry. Data Essentials, a food service marketing company, has created this evolution of food. Healthy 1.0 throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s is the definition of health that focused on weight management. Products and dishes highlighted what they didn't have in them. They were low calories, zero fat, and low carb. Then came along Healthy 2.0, starting in 2004 and still in action today. This next generation of healthy was all about feeling good. So foods were natural, organic, sustainable, etc. Then came Healthy 3.0. It is a new generation of health foods that focus on function and positive nutrition. Consumers want to know what their foods and products will do for them. Will it supply protein and energy, support their health, etc.? Then Healthy 4.0 actually was just defined right before the pandemic. And this is actually about personalized nutrition. These are programs like GenoPlate, which give diet advice based on one's DNA, and fitness trackers, which help users track meals and exercise for customized daily nutrition goals. So the question will be, what is Healthy 5.0 going to look like? How quickly is a new trend going to appear once the pandemic ends? And will any of these previous ones pick up steam as a result of it? So pre-pandemic and still today, we see that consumers are extremely interested in claims-based meats, as I discussed earlier. As the U.S. consumer continues to change demographically, packaged claims continue to grow in importance, whether that is organic or natural or grass-fed. Consumers are looking for foods that they deem healthier, and consumers associate package claims with those healthier foods. So in our recent Miden research, we have seen that the number of consumers seeking out healthier cuts of meat has increased from 48% in July to 54% in September. And as Melissa mentioned earlier, this is where we see a strange interaction of consumers wanting healthier foods because they are worried about their health and wellness needs. But at the same time, we see the number of convenience chasers grow as consumers are also being much more cost conscious. Similar to all types of meat, claims-based meat availability was spotty at times during the height of the pandemic, which would have affected purchasability. However, antibiotic-related claims, organic and grass-fed claims saw unprecedented growth during the height of the pandemic. During March through July, claims-based meat gained 32% in dollars, with the highest gains for grass-fed at 64%.
I'm going to jump into the next expectation, transparency. It can encompass a lot, and it's a biggie. In fact, it's one of the most important for millennials and Gen Zers. Transparency can lead to trust, and trust is becoming an increasingly more important driver for purchases today. Today's consumers have an elevated understanding of branding, marketing, and advertising. It's all about trust and truth. Consumers are being exposed to negative perceptions of the meat industry. This is a problem. A lot of messages not helping them feel good about the meat industry, particularly at the height of COVID. All these things leave questions in consumers' minds. Over the last few years, the importance of animal care is rising among consumers. 65% of consumers prefer to eat proteins from animals raised in humane conditions. It's time to be more transparent than ever to show consumers the lengths that we go to care for our animals. Research shows consumers have trust issues with the food industry. Younger Americans have more skepticism than older generations and hold higher ethical standards for brands. Millennials and Gen Z agree more than older generations that if brands express a view I agree with, I'm more likely to buy it. They also like brands and stores that are willing to get involved in societal issues. We need to be sure we emphasize ethical sourcing and chain of custody, ensure truth in advertising, and be authentic and transparent. We've seen companies go to great lengths to be leaders in transparency and setting high standards in the foods they offer. Whole Foods was a pioneer in differentiating themselves with a set of self-developed standards that remain some of the toughest to meet. According to the 2020 Power of Meat report, 43% of shoppers say animal welfare concerns impact their food decisions. Sustainability is vital to transparency, a term that is more and more consumers and therefore companies are talking about. The challenge we have for both is truly understanding what it means. The definition of industry efforts in sustainability are wide and varied. Consumers can't define it and do not know how to place a value on it, but they know it's important. If a consumer did have a definition of sustainability before COVID, it's likely different now. Brands need to define their sustainability messaging and share it with consumers to remain transparent and trusted. All of these factors lead to trust, which is becoming an increasingly more important driver for purchases today. So why do we need to earn trust now? 70% of consumers who prefer a national brand do so because they trust the brand or company behind the product. Building trust in your product equals loyalty, which equals repeat purchases. Building trust in the retail space. 67% of consumers feel it is important for grocery stores to provide transparency into how and where livestock was raised, and 55% of consumers also believe brands should provide transparency into how and where livestock was raised. Consumers are interested in learning more about food safety, animal welfare, and health, typically go to a government source or use its search engine to find more information. But these sources are not feeding them the info that they need. Consumers would like to see this information on pack, on the brand website or social media, in-store signage, and also on the grocery store website, app, or social media. Consumers are also seeking transparency at food service. 68% of consumers say that they consider how and where their food is grown and raised when making a meal decision. 30% of consumers want restaurants to be more transparent about the items on their menu. And 24% of consumers are interested in seeing information on ingredient sourcing. COVID-19 has increased brand switching, and now trust can be the make or break difference for the brands. We have meat and ag influencers like Brandy Buzzard, Farm Babe, and Mom at the Meat Counter who are great examples for how to communicate our stories to consumers. Take notes from them on how to gain trust. Be proactive, up your transparency, and talk directly to consumers. So what are you doing to help sell your story? Consumers are seeking safety and security, transparency, recognition of their needs, variety and options, and convenience. Remember, change equals challenge, but also opportunity. Seize the opportunity. Rick and I want to thank you for your attention, and I believe Catherine will be jumping on stage in just a few minutes. Thank you.